rise and join me in the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Mr. Blakesley, would you call roll, please?
Yes, thank you. Committee Member Dodds? Here. Committee Member Gibson? Here. Committee Member Hammond, or Roden? Here. And we have an item to announce the appointment.
Okay, perfect.
In a little bit. Thank you. Committee Member Merrill? Graves? Here. Alternate Graves, thank you. And Chair Turntime?
Present.
And there is a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's move right into item 4. Are you going to introduce this item, Taylor?
Yes, thank you. We did, staff was noticed that there is a member change for San Miguel Community Services District. And so this item is to notice that change. And so I'll turn it over to Committee Member Kelly Dodds.
Yes, thank you. At our September meeting, our board elected to appoint Mr. Berkeley Baker as our member, and myself would be moving to alternate. So if this board is amenable to that, then I would like to invite him up here and take my place.
I'll move approval of that change. Do we make formal approval of that, or is that so totally within the CSD's purview? I think.
Well, I don't know how it really works. Before we just people would just disappear, but my board did authorize this, and this is their direction. So unless there is any opposition, I don't think there's.
Yeah, I don't think approval is required of this committee. It's your agency can determine who's the member and the alternate.
So, if it's all right with you guys, I'd like to invite Mr. Berkeley Baker up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
We have Microsoft.
Yeah, I could work on getting the volume up.
Your check. Okay, and then I think we have item 5, a similar adjustment for the city of Paso Robles.
Yes, Mr. Chair, committee members. At the October 3rd Paso Robles City Council meeting, Mayor Hammond and fellow council members nominated Council Member Sharon Roden to serve as an alternate on this committee. So the Paso Robles GSA is asking that the committee invite her up to take a seat next to you to fulfill those duties.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So I'd certainly like to warmly welcome Mr. Baker and Ms. Roden to full participation in this committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item 6. We will take public comment on Mr. Blakesley, would you review the meeting protocols, please?
Yes, just wanted to call out, as you folks probably have seen when you're looking at the agenda, it's rather lengthy. And so we do have a very busy agenda. And to facilitate a smooth meeting, what we will have is staff will present at each item, followed by public comment, and then it will go back to the members for discussion. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Again, we are, again, especially because of the length of the meeting, we're not going to allow exceptions to that 3-minute rule. I know previously there's been sometimes allowances to allow speakers to finish, but again, due to the heavy load, we're going to ask people to hold themselves to that 3-minute, and we will enforce that 3-minute per person rule. Comments will be made for folks in person, and then via Zoom, and we'll look to Zoom to see if there's any comments via Zoom or using the telephone. And we'd also ask you to avoid discussions in the Zoom chat. Not everyone in the room can see those. Lastly, we also ask you to silence your cell phone, which I need to do as well. So that we do not disrupt the meeting. So appreciate that. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. And I would also just add that, you know, it's always possible to make more lengthy comments via email to Blaine that's circulated to the whole board. There's certainly, we are going to take public comment on every item, and I'd like to actually go back and take public comment on items 4 and 5 quickly as well. Okay. Mr. Graywall.
Yes, thank you, sir. Anything that's on the agenda, the Brown Act, what we're under, is public comment. This is why I brought it up. I appreciate your comments that we've never had to approve a member coming from a different GSA to be on this board. We didn't approve Mr. Gibson when he kicked off Debbie Arnold. We didn't approve other people when they did what they did. We didn't approve you when Mr. Kuna stepped down. So this just seemed a little odd to me that if all these GSAs are independent and this group is just an advisory made up of all the GSAs, I don't understand why you're approving anybody that each GSA decides to send as their representative. So I found that inappropriate on here, that it wasn't an introduction of the new person, it was an approval of a new person. So I don't see why we have to go through that ever again. If the GSAs are independent and they get to pick who they want, then they get put on this board accordingly to take whoever's place and who their alternate is. Thank you.
Chair, make a comment.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would just like to offer an apology on behalf of the staff that the wording is actually incorrect. We shouldn't have asked you to approve it. Each GSA has the prerogative to appoint their own member and alternate. So that's an error on my part. My apologies.
So we're inviting them to join us today.
Correct.
Welcoming them. Welcoming. Thank you. Any other public comment on items 4 and 5?
Murray Powell, I'm a member of the Expanded Monitoring Well TAC Committee. I'm also a member of TAG, but I'm now representing TAG today. So I've got a question on the actual purpose of this committee. Looking at the SLO County's grand jury report, response report, there's 4 or 5 comments in there, and that basically one way or another say that they wanted to clarify that this committee is simply an advisory body to each of the GSAs with no authority to adopt or implement the GSP.
Murray, I don't want to.
Does not accept.
My apologies for interrupting. And I'm not sure, it sounds like your comments would be number 8, the item, or number 7, public comment, items not on the agenda. Is that right?
Oh, I thought that's what this is.
I think I think the chair has asked us to go back through 4 and 5 to allow comments, and then we'll get to 7.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought this was just not on agenda comments.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I apologize for that.
Thank you.
But stay there, Mr. Powell. Any other comments on items 4 and 5? Okay. We'll move on to item 7, public comment for items not on the agenda.
Oh.
And
You're back.
Okay, hopefully you remember who I was, or I am. Anyway, so going forward, looking at the SLO County responses to the grand jury report, I think they sent them in August, possibly. Mr. Gibson can clarify that if anybody wants to know. Anyway, so I was reading, so according to these responses, It says the county wants to clarify that the Paso Basin Cooperative Committee, which is simply an advisory body to each of the GSAs with no authority to adopt or implement the groundwater sustainability plan, does not itself collect any well data and so on. And there's other comments that are similar to that. There's about 5 of them in here at least. So talking with members of the public and also myself, we are all confused as to actually what is the purpose of this board? Because the way I understand it is that whatever approvals, like we did this morning or today already, or any other issues that come up that indicate that there's a vote, sounds like there's no effect, that each of you has to go back to your individual GSAs and get individual approval of anything that is discussed in here before it could ever be put into effect. And maybe I'm misunderstanding that, but I think it would be useful for somebody, and there's no legal counsel here either, I know, to try to explain exactly what we're doing here. So if you could do that, it would be appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Turntine. Greg Grewell, Creston. We have a form called a Form 700 with a conflict of interest. And these forms have not been filled out. They have not been filled out by the new members that have been added to the board, and have not been updated by the members who are on the board. For example, you used to work for Harvard, and now you work for some other company we don't even know out of Canada, called Truesdale or something. So 3 years ago during COVID, Harvard sold their property. Where's the meeting minutes from your meeting to where you were voted in to be still on this board or your water district? And why is there no 700 form with the conflict of interest showing what's going on? Here we have a basin with people living over a basin, and the people that live here are the ones concerned about the basin. And we have all these outside interests, and we have certain people that belong to all these committees and all these different things that have a majority over those committees that all have personal conflicts and are paid by other people that want to dictate what goes on with the water in this basin. When 8% of it is used for irrigated ag and the other 92% are not the problem. This needs to be resolved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graywall. Sure.
Just on my behalf, because you asked, the new people haven't filed it. I've been in the process of trying to get it filed since I came on the council, and I'm having trouble getting in touch with the FBCC. It is the only holdup. We are still trying to do that. So, but I have no conflicts, just so you know. I just wanted to make it clear.
Any other public comment on item 7, items not on the agenda?
Good afternoon, board. My name is Candy Nagel in Templeton, and yes, all 3 of my wells are still dry. My main concern today is, well, I did agree with Murray with the advisory council. I did see that advisory board listed quite a few times in the grand jury report, which confused me as well. But what I came today is to address the word equity that we had that big discussion about Mr. Gibson's draft that he made. And I want to talk about equity for just a second. If grapes take 326,000 gallons of water for an acre just to grow for a year, that divided by my 4,000 gallons that I get a month comes to 81. 81 divided by 12, but 12 months out of a year gives me 6 years, 9 months of water with that 326,000 gallons of water for the acre of grapes. That to me is not equity. I'm losing out on this. As I look out my front door, I see nothing but green grapes growing, green vines growing, grass growing, and it makes me sick. So I just wanted to say, the word equity does not apply to me in that statement, Mr. Gibson. I'm sorry. If you do the math, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Thank you very much for your time. Please don't forget the residential well owners. We're out there, even though we're not here in numbers. If I speak for one, I speak for many. And just because I can't rally the call and ride on horseback through the neighborhoods doesn't mean that I don't care. I do. And I'll be standing here till the day I die and just keep harping, and as long as my wells are dry. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment on item 7? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring that back. Item 8, Mr. Reilly, any response to previous comments?
None.
So moving on to item 9, we have a report from Mr. Ray from the EPC. So we'll hear Mr. Ray's presentation, then take public comment, and then bring it back to the committee for discussion.
Thank you, Chairman. Jerry Ray, I'm the staff person for the EPC Water District. At the last PBC meeting on September 7th, this committee authorized the PBC staff to investigate or to start looking into groundwater extraction methodologies. And so I'm following up to that from our last PBC meeting. The PBCC calls monitoring of groundwater extraction, they call it crop water use module. The grand jury calls it groundwater utilization. I call it who uses how much down to the parcel level. So as a follow-up to the last PBC committee meeting, the PBC staff met on September 21st. All 5 members were there. I think Randy was a 6th member, if I'm correct. We had an agenda and we had an hour-and-a-half meeting. It was a very lively discussion. And the consensus of that meeting was 2 things. One is that the PBCC staff would focus on ET as the primary methodology for determining and measuring groundwater extraction. The staff also developed a consensus that the staff needs to develop a criteria for how ET extraction monitoring, what it would look like. Subsequent to that meeting, the 2 water districts, Shannon, San Juan, and EPC, engaged our own engineer to start working with us to start putting together this strategy of how we're going to come to a conclusion, how we're going to monitor groundwater extraction. We've had a meeting with our staff, with our engineer, and we've had numerous telephone calls developing this criteria list for how we're going to do ET monitoring. We're also beginning to identify potential providers and look at various methodologies that we can use with the ET method. So as soon as that list gets put together, we will reconvene the PBCC staff. We will present our findings. We'll ask the staff to review, to modify, and hopefully endorse the information we've gathered in terms of what we're going to be recommending in terms of groundwater monitoring. Once we do that, we'll develop an action plan and bring all of that back to this committee. And hopefully we can do that relatively soon. Any questions?
I have a question. With the evapotranspiration method, can you accurately gauge exactly how much water is utilized even on ground where crops are not growing pre-irrigation?
I think the short answer to that is yes. There are a number of water districts and GSAs around the state that actually do that. They come up with a specific water use. Some of the people that do ET do extensive what's called ground truthing, which is not only do they take the ET data, but they also travel around the basin and say, okay, ET says they're using this much. What does the ground truthing say in terms of looking at meters and things like that? So the intention is that ET will be able to go on a parcel basis and say, this is the best estimate we can come up with of how much water is being used.
Is it more reliable than meters?
Well, that's a long discussion.
Okay,
Because
we can talk another time then.
The assumption is that meters are accurate, which they can be.
Well,
You know, if you go to a gas station and you pump, 9.95 gallons, that meter's accurate. When you're in the agricultural environment, there's all sorts of things that can happen with meters. There's old technology, there's new technology. If you have a well that pumps sand, your meter may fail more quickly. There's no universal standard for what's the right meter. And certainly standard meters are a traditional way of doing it, but meters do not provide any sort of look back where ET provides substantial look back. It's okay, what did you do in 2021? What did you do in 2022? Because this is satellite data and you can go, it has that look back. Also, if we started today with meters, it might be 3 to 4 years, maybe 2 to 3, 4 years before we actually have meaningful data around the basin, where ET technology provides us with potential almost immediate access to that type of information.
momentary.
Yeah, and the other thing is when you start looking at meters, there's some parcels that are irrigated but don't have a well on it. How do a meter work into that? There's how do you share that information? There's a long discussion, but I think there's a general consensus that ET technology has progressed very, very substantially over the last few years, and it's the best way to go.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ray. I'd like to open this up for public comment on item 9.
Thank you, Board. Greg Graywall. I am on the Technical Advisory Committee with Mr. Ray on expanded monitoring. Okay, we have over 50, close to 50 acre-foot ponds over the basin with no monitoring that are filled all the time consistently with no covers, and we're not calculating the evaporation, the ET off of those ponds. And ET doesn't measure extraction. It measures evaporation, which I think is accurate or close enough. And the way to test it out is you put some meters on certain things and you check the ET against those meters. Meters have to be calibrated on a regular basis. Even if it's fuel, you still have agencies that show up to make sure that the pumps aren't cheating you. So that being said, we have 4 golf courses in the city of Paso Robles that are not being monitored or read. We have a landfill across from Tobin James as part of there. It's not being monitored. Nobody knows how much water they're using. But we told 4,000 or 5,000 small people over the basin in the 436,000 acres that they couldn't do anything, while other people were doing everything. That's unreasonable. And that's why this needs to be rectified. And the 8% that's using 90% of the water needs to start ponying up for the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graywall. Any other public comment on item 9?
Can you put up the page 4 of the agenda package, the actual report that this is referencing?
Chair, would you like me to go ahead and pull that up?
Please.
It's on page 4 of the package. There we go. Great, thank you. So a couple things, and this kind of follows along a little bit with what I was talking about earlier about each of the GSAs having to do their own meetings. So a couple questions, and I brought this up earlier. So right at the beginning there, it says PBCC staff met on the September 21st to start a discussion. Is that a public comment? I mean, a meeting? And who are the PBCC staff that were involved in that meeting? That's my first question. Secondly, if you go down a little bit, Tyler, if you don't mind. So here, the two water districts met with their engineering consultants, so it sounds like there was a joint meeting. And I don't remember seeing a public notice for that meeting either. So my understanding is that each of the GSAs are required to give public notice, and you would think that at least those of us who are involved in the PBC TAC committees would be getting notice of this stuff, and we're not. So I'd like to hear how these public noticing and these meetings are going to get resolved so that the public at least knows what's going on here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on item 9?
Sure. I'll respond to those questions so that our agencies can assign their staff, whoever their staff people are, to do their staff work, just like the city and the county does. And the meeting that Jerry wrote up, that was just the two of us acting as staff to start the exploration. So anything that we learn, we'll bring back in a public forum later. So it wasn't the whole water district's meeting. It was just the two of us going over to Nate's office and looking at some of the stuff and getting him to talk about ideas, trying to move the ball forward. But the parts that you're concerned about definitely have to happen in public meetings and forums like this with good noticing. Thank you.
No. No, that's not an official response. Miss.
Candy Nachel again. I'm on the TAC committee as well. And my thing is that I want to see us move. When we started the TAC committee, we all agreed that we were going to go as hard as we could and get things done as soon as we could. And to me, we keep having meetings canceled or delayed. And I'm hoping that we don't wait till 2029 and go, oh no, we need to get something done quick now because we only have a few more years to do it. So I'm looking forward to getting something set in stone so we can get busy with it all. And this is very far-fetched, but in my real world, I like to see all the ag wells metered and checked and not have, I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to know how much water they're actually using out of the basin. And my last comment was in reflection of that way of thinking about the water usage of the vineyards. Thank you.
Thank you. Any, no, Mr. Powell, you've already made your comment.
Okay.
No.
First of all, I haven't
No,
used my,
no,
I haven't used my 3 minutes on my public comment. So I would like to.
I have it muted. Would you like to continue with this or?
Mr. Powell, you don't have standing. Grace. You can sit down so we can.
Are you the chair?
I'm commenting, sir, and I'd like you to sit down.
Well, you may want me to sit down, but I'm not sitting down.
Yep.
So, thank you for your advice. So I would like Mr. Cooper to clarify why they are
Okay. Any additional public comment on item 9? Seeing none, I will bring this back to the committee for discussion. I'd like to say thank you, Mr. Ray, for the report. I'm glad that there is progress. I look forward to the further findings and recommendations that will come back to this committee soon. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I agree. We've been applying the same technology a bit in Los Osos. About to release a technical memo on that, which is starting to confirm our understanding of how we can estimate agricultural water use. I think this is going to be a very efficient, and once it's calibrated, I think we can calibrate it with ground truthing that's been mentioned. I think it's going to be a very efficient and relatively non-intrusive way to get the information we need to run the management of this basin. So look forward to it.
I do have a question about the ponds that came up. I know that in our water district, we've had an issue that the metering was prior to or after the ponds and not before, and it's created big discrepancy. With the ET, does it actually accurately record use out of those ponds?
I mean, that's a great question that I would hope will be addressed in the recommendations that come back. I kind of doubt it.
I tend to think so, but I think, you know, those who run reservoirs have experience in using parameters like the temperature during the day, the number of hours of sunlight, temperature and humidity to estimate that. You know, it also, as we develop
Well, you
the,
have percolation in
Yeah.
ponds that may
Yeah.
not be accounted for,
Yeah.
is my question.
Yeah. no, that's all reasonable things to pass
lot of
on to
ponds-
the technical.
A lot of ponds have
technical
not
term.
been
Sure.
sealed, so you do have a lot of percolation.
Yeah, and
So if you're not accounting for that water, then
that's
it's not
fair.
adjusted
That's fair enough. Yeah.
work. So,
Good question.
and I'd like to actually get educated. I'm sorry, I'm kind of coming into this in the middle of a movie here. But I would like to get educated on the ability, on the accuracy of using ET for something other than what I've always used in our farming practices. So I don't know if we need to get together for a schooling or what, but
Obviously, the process, we will not only at staff level, but at the community level, we'll be presenting, you know, much more detailed discussions of how this works. We'll probably have presentations from maybe one or two or however many people we think may be realistic candidates to provide that type of information. So this is, my report is really kind of an introductory thing of how we're starting this process. But there's a lot of information available about other water districts doing this. The people we'll be looking at as our providers will also be able to provide that type of information. So there's a lot more coming. We're the first step in this, but there'll be more information.
thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I make a comment,
Yes,
please?
please.
I just would like to, first of all, thank our staff for the time. I know that you put a lot of volunteer time into doing these projects, and I really appreciate that. I have a lot of confidence in the scientific accuracy of ET, and I remember my grandfather who farmed in Fresno, looking every morning in the Fresno Bee where they used to publish ET numbers. And I also had the opportunity a long time ago when I was in school at Fresno State to visit the lysimeter at Kearney Ag Station, where Dr. Larry Williams did all of the research establishing ET numbers. It's science that I think is accurate and it has a long history. And I think that it's a good option for us to use that. That's it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I don't think there's any action that we need to take on this item, so we will move on to item 13. And again, we'll hear the presentation, then we'll take public comment, and then we'll bring it back to the committee for discussion. Mr. Ely.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is a very brief status report. As you know, we, the county and the other agencies within the basin, and in fact, all GSAs within the basin, collect groundwater level data at least biannually in a network of wells. This is a report on the status of the county's activities, and they do it twice a year, once in April, once in October. The October round is well underway. As of October 20th, 84 of the 96 wells in the county's network have been measured. 6 are still planned to be measured. And in fact, I think they were going to be measured today. And then 6 of those wells were not, we were not successful in being able to measure those for a number of different reasons. It's going to be over 90% of the wells that have been successfully measured. And then that water level data will be assimilated and brought back to this board or this committee with a report in the spring.
Great, thank you, Mr. Reilly. Any public comment on this item 10?
Thank you, board. Very well. My only thing that I can say about this, there should have been at least 3 months, if not 4 months, of these rain totals on the 2022 annual report. Because the rain year starts in October 1st and ends in September 30th, so it crosses 2 years, but the annual report didn't show that. So the information that the grand jury put out did not show our great rain year and the miscalculation they put and what the groundwater that was not being recharged. We had double normal annual rainfall. We had recharge that was unbelievable. So that should have been accounted for. And as we go into now, we're gonna hear later talk about the new report that's gonna be done in 2023. It's gonna look really extra good, and hopefully we'll get better. But when you look at this map later on, we're gonna show other maps with what we want to add with the well monitoring, and you're gonna see some different things. And what people need to realize is where the 300 wells went dry are where all the main irrigation is. Those are all the shallow wells. That's where we need the more monitoring, and that's where we need the more reporting. And this is what we've been working on for the last 4 or 5 months to identify where the problems are. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on item 10? Seeing none, I'll bring this back to the committee. Thank you, Mr. Reilly, for that report. Any other comments or questions?
Quick question, what's typically the timeline to seeing the results from this round of monitoring in October?
This information will go, we'll make it available the first meeting of the year. Probably if there's a January meeting, we'll have it available by then. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 11, Mr. Reilly.
Yes, so each year, as part of our requirements, Sigma requirements, we're required to submit an annual report. It is basically a report card on the condition of the basin. Sigma sets forth what needs to be included and addressed in those annual reports. And again, each annual report is for a water year. So it's from October 1st of 1 year. In this case, the 2023 annual report, which we're going to start working on, is from October 2022 to September 30th, 2023. So it isn't the calendar year. So as Mr. Graywell just mentioned, most of the response from that wet winter will show up in this 2023 annual report. Last year, when we came to you in October of 2022, October 26th meeting, brought a proposed or a contract for your consideration with GSI Water Solutions to do both water year 2022 annual report and water year 2023 annual report. The PBCC recommended that each of the GSAs approve or recommend approval of that contract. So we already had GSI under contract to do the 2023 annual report. And this is just getting your concurrence with moving forward to issue the notice to proceed so they can get started on it. And then off to the right, you can see the breakdown, our cost, each of the GSA's cost share for this year's annual report for a total amount of $94,770.
Thank you, Mr. Reilly. Public comment on this item 11. Mr. Graywall.
Yes, thank you again, Greg Graywall. So things in this report show rating totals, ag water use, metered water from the municipalities, the appropriators, Nazi water use, Salinas River water use, what water comes from the Tascadero Basin, what water comes from the Paso Basin, what's being done with the wastewater. And for some reason, we always put the golf courses from the city of Paso and the other small, what they consider public agencies in with rural residents. That needs to be separated. Rural residents are not part of the city of Paso Robles, and the water use of anything that's within the city limits is not part of rural water use. You also need to add in the court order. If we have no surplus water, there's been a court order on what the different agencies can take from the Paso Basin, which is the whole Bulletin 118 Basin, which includes a Tascadero Basin in the part in Monterey. So that's 20%. 18% of the basin is in a Tascadero, 2% is in the part in Monterey. So 80% is in the formation of the Paso Basin. These court orders are not being adhered to. There's more water being drawn out that shouldn't be drawn out. And to show that, if you look at the last 6 years of the reports that we've done, Paso Robles had access to 39,000 acre feet of Nacimiento water. They used 7,100. They wasted 32,000 acre feet of water that could have been put to beneficial use. This is not best management practices, and this is unacceptable. So instead of trying to sell the water to the farmers and blend it with the poop water, you need to expand your plant and clean the water and use it for your town and reduce the pumping on the basin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graywall. Any further public comment on item 11? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the committee. Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The item before us today is listed as only informational. I wanted to confirm there's no action being requested of the committee because it was authorized already last October. This is just to let us know that it's happening, and here is now the breakdown of cost with the 5 GSAs instead of the 4 previously. So
That's correct.
yeah, it's all part of the normal flow of things, and we'll look forward to seeing the results in February.
Mr. Baker.
Yeah, I do have a comment regarding what Mr. Graywell was talking about, the golf courses and being lumped in with rural residential and not to the city. What is there an explanation for that?
That was a decision that was made during the development of the groundwater sustainability plan, and then we've continued to, the annual report effectively is just a report card on the progress towards sustainability based on that groundwater sustainability plan. I think if that's a change that would be requested, it could happen in an update of the groundwater sustainability plan, which we'll probably start considering in the next year or so.
Okay. Or at least be asterisk. So, you know, be an asterisk by it. So you know that what the golf courses, these are a tremendous amount of water.
Yes, we can certainly do that as a clarification in the next annual report. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Seeing no further comment from the committee. Thank you, Mr. Reilly. We'll move on to item 12. And I think here, Mr. Gibson was going to make a presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just it's an idea that that came to me as I was talking with county staff as we were considering our management and representation of the members of the county GSA. And that is, I think that certainly our GSA, and I would guess most GSAs, could usefully raise our game, shall we say, in terms of communication with our members. I know, and I don't mean to speak of matters that I don't know for those individual GSAs, but as I look down the road, I see we've got a lot of things coming. We've got the fee study coming, which we're going to be discussing, and eventually fees are going to be assessed on parcels in the basin. We've got the Miller program, which is, I think, a concept that's well understood in this room, but as we get further from this room, maybe not so much. The monitoring network, where we're going to be going out and asking people for access to information as an important part of managing this basin, and then the ET means of monitoring extraction. So it just seemed to me that, at least from the county GSA standpoint, I'd like to develop a communications and outreach program and start being able to, for instance, send a newsletter to make sure that we understand exactly who it is that is a member of each GSA. And again, I'll speak only for the county's GSA, to make sure we know the breakdown of acreages, the breakdown of residences, the breakdown of agricultural use, and to be able to make sure that each of those different constituencies within the GSA gets the information they need to be kept up to date on what's going on with Sigma in the basin. As I thought about it more, it seemed to me that might be something the PBCC might move forward as a whole. And the one place where I see that as useful would be the development of a PBCC or a Paso Basin Sigma website in and of itself, separate from a page on the county website, where we could have, all the archived information, our meeting records, recordings, minutes, the annual reports as they stack up, news as to what we're doing, so that anybody interested in the Paso Basin might be able to go to one spot and find out what's going on. The other thing that I could see that website acting as is an information center, for instance, getting people connected with resources if they do have a well that goes dry. That's absolutely an important thing. There are various sorts of aids, and even beyond a website, I think as we look down the road, I think it not unreasonable to consider that part of the administration of the Paso Basin from a Sigma perspective involves staff who would help people get connected with information and resources. So what I wondered was whether my fellow members of the committee might be interested in having our PBCC staff put together a request for proposals on a communication and outreach plan. Get a sort of frame it up, see what it might cost to develop our own website, to scope what we need in terms of those resource information, to see how we might craft appropriate outgoing communications like newsletters, really talk about it as a group so we could put forward a coherent picture of what's going on. So I wanted to bring that to the committee to see if you have interest in that. I don't think it would be horribly expensive. I think it would probably fit within budgeted amounts, or as we look to next year. So I was going to bring it for your consideration and for the consideration and comment from the public.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We'll start with that public comment, and then we'll bring it back to the committee for discussion. Public comment on this item 12, please. Mr. Cunha.
Yep, Willie Cunha from the far Shandon. Yeah, I strongly support Mr. Gibson's notion that we have access for public comment at our meetings, but to broaden that would be very, very useful. And even some more meetings like we had earlier in the process when we went out to Creston and local elementary schools. Like you mentioned, as Mr. Gibson mentioned, there's going to be more consequential actions considered, and explain how we're measuring and why we're measuring and how that protects people. All of those things would be fantastic.
Thank you.
Candy Nation again. I think I've been harping about getting the word out for a year and a half, almost 2 years now. And that's been my one bigaboo from this whole story. My first thing was to get to Mr. Blaine, and we had a long conversation at my house about this. I spent hours and hours on the internet. When my 3 wells went dry, I had no idea where to go. Looked in the county website, there's nothing. Mr. Gibson, if your plan is gonna work, and I've talked to you about this as well, you've got to put a link on the county website that leads to your new website, or people aren't gonna be able to find it. They're not gonna know. And you've got to do, excuse me, outreach by newsletter or something, because, I'm sorry. As a residential well owner, I did not know where to look. People just crawl down and try to, call the well driller and find out what it's gonna cost them. They don't know about the RCAC. They don't know about the places that you can get help, low interest loans, or you can get, if you qualify, you can get wells drilled for free. So it needs to be done, but you gotta think that everybody's gonna be an old lady sitting at home with her hands in her lap, not knowing where to go with it. Because people don't understand this. They take it like, well, it's my property, it's my problem, but it doesn't have to be. So please consider that you're looking at think of the layman sitting at home not knowing what to do when you're planning this out. Think of you don't have to make it elementary, but make it so people can find it and understand what they're going for, what they can go to, okay? Please just take over some of the headache that I didn't have to endure if I would have had that available to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jerry Ray, EPC Water District. I appreciate Supervisor Gibson's comments on a PBC website. At our last EPC Water District meeting, our board voted support to the county and to this committee that we highly recommend and would support a website independent from the county that is focused strictly on the issues of the PBCC and be a common repository for information. So I think that would be a great step forward. And again, EPC totally supports that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Board. Greg Graywall. We have roughly 300 dry wells that have been replaced. That's approximately $21 million. The county created those ag clusters and they allowed those shallow wells. And then they allowed the irrigated ag to come in around them when the clusters were supposed to be built to be able to support ag around them. But like stack and pack housing, we flooded the area. If you're used 2 acre-feet or less, you're a de minimis user. For the last 10 years, because of the emergency ordinance, you basically screwed over all the small people and let certain people pump unlimited with no monitoring while you told other people they couldn't use their land. And now you want outreach. The outreach should have happened before you created the emergency ordinance. When you flooded the market with people planting fast and adding wells and doing different things. We had 2 things we were supposed to do from the Department of Water Resources was to show them what our surface water and the connectivity to the groundwater and what we were going to do about the shallow wells. A lot of the shallow wells have been replaced. I don't see a program yet to pay those people back or to do anything for them. The surface to groundwater, we have 75 years of our water from our watershed going to South County from the Salinas Reservoir that should have been flowing down the Salinas River, which is our interconnectivity that recharges our basin. And I don't see anything to reverse or do anything like that, even though the water code says that if you're taking water from a different watershed and you're creating a problem, you need to reduce what you're doing or you need to stop what you're doing. So all these things need to be taken into consideration when we're talking about outreach. We had multiple ways of doing outreach. We have 4 main areas, maybe 5, where we have these well problems. They were Jardine, El Pomar, Squirrel Hollow, and Estrella. So it's real easy. All of those information we have listed on the replacement wells, who these people are, how deep their wells were, how deep their wells went to, and how to address them. And those are the people we want to contact to see if they want to be on our list to give their well information to this committee so we can monitor what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm George Tracy. I live in San Miguel. I agree that this group needs to have a website. More than that, needs to have an organizational structure besides the memorandum of understanding. You cannot have individual groups making their own decisions and affecting the group as a whole and have any way to control what's going on. I don't understand, and we'll come to that as in a later part of the agenda, how the four people who are listed on the memorandum of understanding and the fifth group, which is not on that, can have an impact and sign up for roughly 30% of the cost of this group. I just don't quite get why this group doesn't have a more orderly functioning and have some way of making sure that the whole group agrees before it all goes back to the individual GSAs. It's not very efficient. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Any additional public comment on this item 12?
Murray Powell. I believe I waved this around. This is a 24-page booklet from the DWR. It was issued in March of this year. It's called Considerations for Identifying and Addressing Drinking Water Well Impacts. And just to remind everybody, California Water Code, Section 106 says that residential domestic wells are first priority and irrigation is second. So this is, I think, a perfect guideline. It's a great book, and it gives you instructions on how to proceed with this whole project. Good news is I totally agree with Mr. Gibson on the separate website. I think that is a great idea. It should have been done long ago. Anyway, on this booklet, if I refer to their page 5, it says perform public outreach. And without going through the whole thing, it says drinking water well users may not be represented or organized in consolidated ways that allow for GSAs to consult with and consider their interests. Further on it goes, it suggests that there needs to be a more robust outreach besides websites. It talks about involving NGOs and CBOs in the process in community organizations and public meetings and so forth. And it also encourages municipal agencies, city, county, and health departments that may have information or communication pathways to understand and consult with drinking water well users and well owners. So we have a lot of different ways of communicating outreach that needs to be done. And if you folks should take a look at this and maybe put this into your program here for outreach, because it goes much further than just websites. So I hope you will take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Any other public comment on this item 12? Okay, not seeing any, none online. Not seeing any, bring it back to the committee. Member Graves.
My comment on item 12 regarding potential public outreach initiatives would be that not only do I think it's important, but I think that we have a responsibility to do this. And as Mr. Ray mentioned, we did have a conversation about this at our board meeting in September, and I feel confident speaking on behalf of our board when I say that we would support this. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent idea. I think especially if people have opportunity to comment. My concern is who is going to control the content on the website and just make sure that it's honest information.
I concur with that as well. I do agree with some of the public comments that it would have served us better had we had information, the cart before the horse type of thing would actually have been beneficial in this case, but, and also making it simple to use. I'm not real high techy and like most people are these days. So, having it very accessible to people who are maybe not used to computers as much, but can still access the information, I think would be extremely beneficial, but I think it's a very good idea.
And I also agree. I think that it's a overdue and necessary kind of evolution of our efforts here. I think there's a lot of confusion about the makeup of this committee and what we do, and we certainly have, you know, more complex concepts that are coming out as part of our groundwater sustainability plan implementation that need to be clearly explained to the public and a place for feedback. So I would certainly support a motion to direct PBCC staff to begin exploring what this program would look like and put together a strategy.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, I'll make that motion in just a second. Let me respond briefly to a couple of public comments. I'll have to say that it is exactly Ms. Nachel's situation that inspired me on the matter of making a place where information can be consolidated, where people can have easy access to it. And we look forward, we had a couple of comments about potential content on this, which is absolutely will take advantage of all the hard work Ms. Nachel did. And to Mr. Powell's observations from that report, the different modes of communication, I think, are important too. You know, separately, the county's working very hard on broadband connectivity to all parts of the county, but not everybody has that. What we do need to do is figure out how people can get information, and if that means putting a letter in the U.S. Postal Service, then that's what we should be doing. But my thought is that we really could make use of some expert advice on this to really help us craft understanding the constituency broadly that we have. And so if I might move that the committee direct PBCC staff to explore means by which we could develop a communication and outreach plan, including the possibility of developing a request for proposals that might be circulated for expert advice on how we might craft that.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
A second.
I think voice vote is fine. All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Thank you.
Next item, 13, report on round one grant implementation. Mr. Reilly.
Thank you, Chair Turntine. I can take this item. In your packet is a report on the grant submittals under the DWR $7.6 million grant. Invoice since our last meeting, the fourth invoice was submitted for $9,000. You can see the expenses to the budget. Again, the blue column is the $7.6 million, which is what was awarded to the Paso Basin. Again, expenses are relatively small at this point. However, we do expect those to ramp up here in the next couple quarters. We'll move on to their detailed report by component. So there's 6 components of the grant. And again, you can see on the screen, staff is built in on the tracking the budget to expenses. You can see a lot of these components have costs that are expected to increase towards the end of the grant period. And so you can see the yellow line are the expenses, and then the blue line, again, are the budgets. We, again, will expect much higher expenses to start coming in. And I think there may be some updates on the Paso Recycle project and the San Miguel Recycle project later on. then lastly, components 4, 5, and 6, you can see here. Component 4 has been dealing with the expanded monitoring network. There are other data gaps in component 4. And then component 5 is dealing with the primarily right now with the Miller program and considerations for that project. And then component 6 has been comprised primarily currently of the blended supply project. That's all I have to report unless there's any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blakely. Public comment on this brief item 13 report.
Murray Powell, this is actually a question, and this may exist, so I apologize if I'm wasting time here, but is there any reports out as to the actual expenses that have been incurred that are being funded by each of the individual GCAs in some detail, like indicating like different consulting firm payments or whatever it is? Are there like accounting reports on that available? And if not, can that be made available on at least a quarterly basis to see what the GSAs are actually spending on this project, on this PBCC situation? So I don't know if they exist, and if they do, I think they ought to be provided. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on item 13? All right, bringing it back to the committee. Any comments or questions from committee members?
Are those budgets available to the public?
I mean, each of the GSAs is a public agency, and certainly it has budgets and audits, and that should be all publicly available. It's going to be on a GSA by GSA basis. I know Shannon San Juan has our annual audits on our website that anyone can see what's been spent on what categories.
Do all of
Certainly
them, do all of them, the county does for all of it?
I defer to Mr. Blaine Reilly on that question.
Yeah, my department, the Groundwater Sustainability Department, which has responsibility for Paso Basin as well as other basins, that budget would be available, yes.
Would that be one of the things that we put onto the website as well? So you have everything related to this organization all at one point?
I see no reason not to put everything on this website and make everything available in one place. I mean, make it as transparent as possible.
And just you're going to hit it in a little bit, another future or item coming up to talk about the budget for the PBCC, and that's something that can also be certainly added to the website. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next item is item 14, report on the technical advisory committees. Mr. Blakesley.
Thank you. I'll be providing a brief report on the technical advisory committees that have been in place, and they're listed on the screen: the expanded monitoring network, blended irrigation water supply project, and then the multi-benefit irrigated land repurposing program. I'll provide the report for each one. We ask that the hold public comment to the end of the report. So this would be items 14, A, B, and C. However, after each sub item, we'll make place for an opportunity for the TAC members to provide any statements if they'd like, as we've done in the past.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the first up is Expanded Monitoring Network Technical Advisory Committee. Again, this is the same slide and purpose that we presented in the past. So again, this TAC was set back in March to advise and assist in the implementation of Expanded Monitoring Network. Moving on to the recent information there, since our July meeting, again, we didn't report on this at our September special meeting, but since our July meeting, there have been 3 meetings of the Expanded Monitoring TAC. And really the main body of work that was completed, and they've done a great job, is a recommendation to expand the monitoring network from 23 wells to 151 wells. And that's memorialized in a technical memorandum that's in your packet. And there's an approval item under item number 19. So this will come up again in more detail under that item. But again, the TAC did a great job. They dedicated a lot of their time They you can see met over 9 times or met 9 times and donated their time and energy. And so again, we just couldn't have done it without them. So just a big thank you to the TAC for their efforts. For all the TACs, we're at the place where future TAC meetings will be scheduled on an as needed basis at the direction of GSA staff. So that's the staff recommendation. So I'll pause there, and if there's anyone on the expanded TAC that would like to make a comment, we'll make time for that right now. Okay, not seeing any,
I'll sneak up.
Okay.
Everybody except Randy is in the room. This committee is the most committed committee you got. And Randy's watching.
Thanks, Willie. Okay, the next TAC is the blended irrigation water supply project TAC. Again, it was set to assess with the feasibility of constructing and operating the blended irrigation water supply project. The primary body of work that this TAC was instrumental again is in finalizing an RFP. That was distributed on July 26th. There was approval from this body to issue that RFP. There's an agenda item coming up to award a contract for that item. Again, the TAC was really helpful in developing considerations to develop that RFP. So again, a shout out to all their efforts as well. So a lot of work put in from those guys as well. And as I said, for the expanded future meetings will be scheduled on an as needed basis at the direction of GSA staff. So looking for, if there's anyone from the blended online or in the audience, if you'd like to make a comment. Okay, not hearing. There is one last thing I'd point out for the blended on the schedule side. So there's an agenda item coming up to award a contract, but if the dates hold from the contract, there would be a notice to proceed date for that contract of November 1st, which is coming up very shortly. At which time the study itself is expected, it's specified in the RFP to occur over a 6-month period. So you can see, according to the schedule, we would be reporting back in the spring of next year on the results of that study. And then lastly, the Miller TAC. Again, its purpose is to advise and assist in the development of a Miller program. There was one meeting since our July meeting, and the key items that they're focusing on, even from the July 11th meeting, was identification of we need a funding mechanism, or there needs to be some funding structure to handle some of this program and this project. And that's been a key point of the Miller TAC. We've also, and there is an item later on the agenda to talk about a rate study. So some of those things are in play currently. The other items that they are looking at right now are potential project categories if we move forward with the Miller program, and also discussing the concept of demonstration projects to move things along. And that's all I have to report. Looking if there's anyone from the Miller that would like to make a comment. Okay, not seeing any. Turn it back over to the.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blakesley. Public comment on this report, item 14. Mr. Graywall.
Yes, thank you. A couple comments on the other two committees. Not picking on them. Sorry, all their people aren't here. In 2000, Paso Robles did a study and hired consultants on blended water, and they didn't do anything. That was 23 years ago. Now we got grant money to look at blended water. I want to know why we're not expanding the Nacimiento plant to clean the water for Paso Robles use, why we're looking at trying to blend the water when we have no infrastructure or system of works. We have a system of works to use the water right now that would use all the 6,488 acre feet of water if they expanded their clean facility. Plus, we could probably use the unused water from Atascocita or Water Mutual and the city of San Luis. We'd have more than enough water instead of doing these other things with no infrastructure that we don't have. And if you look at the members, which it doesn't matter about their names, 2 of the committees are made up by 100% of EPC and San Juan. The third group is made up of 4 people that are out of the regular people. And the rest of them are San Juan and EPC people. We have 2 special districts, one with 60 to 66 people, one with 160 to whatever people. That want to control what's going on when we have another 5,000 people that live over the basin that voted against this. I find that unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graywall. Any other public comment on item 14? Okay, seeing none, bring this back to the committee. I don't think there's any action required here. Any comments or questions from committee members?
Simply thanks to all who served, a tremendous amount of work done in a few months. It's awesome.
Okay, moving on to item 15, approval of meeting minutes. I think we have 2 sets of meeting minutes to approve, which is in the packet. I will open this up for public comment on this item.
Thank you, Chairperson Turntine, Greg Grewal. I have one comment to make that was in the minutes from our last meeting, which would have been September 7th. And it deals with what Member Merrill said about state water and about possibly buying 500 acre feet of state water to drop in Crest in the Wero River. And I'd like to point out that in 2006, we got 100% delivery of state water. This year in 2023, we're going to get 100% state water. Big difference between 06 and 2023. In between that, we got 23.5% delivery of state water. There is no state water readily available on a regular basis. The county has failed as a water district in Shannon to use the 100 acre feet of water that they have available to them. Why? If we're using best management practices and they have 100 acre feet of water and that community uses 100 acre feet of water, why over the last 6 years, they only used 140 acre feet out of 600? I went and looked at the facility that cleans the water. I went and looked at the turnout. Hadn't been turned on in 4 years. Why is that? Because they don't want to spend the money. So you're going to tell me that you're going to buy treated chlorinated water at 5 times the amount of pumped water and dump it in the Wero River. That is just unbelievable. So it's not available. It's not always there. The grand jury made the county move $6.5 million back into the proper account that they put in the wrong account and used for 10 years. And they still haven't given the interest on that $6.5 million. I sat on the RAC committee looking at where did this water sale money go from 2008 and 2014? That is a special tax that's on the property owners in this county, not to be used for other stuff. And if you're going to sell, transfer, exchange water, that money needs to go back to the taxpayer on what's being used. So I don't know if the county can't afford to buy the water for Shannon, how EPC or anybody else is going to afford to buy 500 acres, especially when there's no turnout. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graywall. Any other public comment on item 15? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring back to the board. Any questions, comments? And if not,
I'll move approval of these minutes.
Okay, I have a motion, search of a second.
Second.
And I'm not sure how I should proceed with this. I have read the minutes. I don't have any edits. I was present on July 26th. I was not on September 7th.
If I might, Mr. Chairman,
please.
our council has advised, county council has advised county-oriented boards that it's not necessary for you to be present at the meeting in order to act on the minutes. They are a summary of what happened, and if you have general knowledge of that, that's deemed to be adequate. Paraphrasing what they have to say. The official record of the meetings are the recordings and not the minutes, and so especially given the makeup of the committee today, I think we can I think we can confidently go ahead and act on this.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. I think a voice vote is fine. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? None. Okay.
Who was the second?
Ms.
think that
Rhoden.
was-
Sure. Moving on to item 16. Mr. Reilly?
Thank you, Chair. So we're bringing in front of you a proposed amendment number 2 to the memorandum of agreement. Just quick history for some of you that weren't around. The PBCC formed in September of 2017 under the terms of a memorandum of agreement, or refer to it as the MOA. The section 6 of the MOA anticipated and anticipates that PBCC will retain the services of consultants. And in reality, it isn't the PBCC that retains the services of the consultants. It's one of the GSAs. In this case, or under the terms, or under the original MOA, it was agreed that the city of Paso Robles would serve as the contracting agency on behalf of the PBCC. And that is currently in place. Over the past, actually 2 years, we've modified, or we've been flexible enough where the county has served as the primary contracting entity for the annual reports for the last 2 years, which is really the only consulting activity that the GSAs collectively have agreed on under the terms of the MOA. What we're asking is that the MOA be amended under amendment number 2 that would allow all PBC GSAs to act as the contracting agent on behalf of the PBCC while it continues to explore and develop long-term governance options. So sort of in short, the MOA says that the city of Paso will serve as the contracting agency. We're asking to make the language more flexible so that the county and the other GSAs, if they so desire, could serve as the contracting agent for consultant contracts that serve the PBCC. Just a note, section 4.8 of the MOA requires 100% vote for any amendments to the MOA. So each of the GSAs are going, if the amendment is to become in effect, each of the GSAs will have to vote to have that so. And then included in the agenda packet is the proposed amendment number 2 for your consideration.
Thank you. And just for clarity, I mean, this amendment will need to be approved by each of the GSAs.
That's correct.
And the only action we'd be taking today is recommending to each of our GSAs that they do indeed adopt this or not.
Correct.
Let's open this up for public comment. Public comment on item 16. Mr. Tracy.
George Tracy, Sam to go. This was the item that I was going to really talk about. The memorandum of agreement that is the way this thing is operating right now. You all have to go back, 4 of you have to go back to your group, according to the letter that was attached to the amendments. Only 4 of you can vote on this. And therefore, you all have to go back to your group. In the case of Paso Robles, it's the city council and whoever else. And that does take a while for that to happen. And yet, if this group is going to have any way to do something, they're going to have a different organizational structure. A joint powers agency is one thing that I would recommend you do. And however you want to divide it up as far as the responsibility and the authority, that's up to you. But a joint powers agency has significantly more powers than individuals like you have now. I am volunteering my well to be a monitoring well. And we discussed this a couple weeks ago at the technical committee. Who am I going to contract with? I'm not going to contract with individual groups. 5 of you, I can't sign a contract with 5 people. for something like that. It needs to have some structure and it should be with one group. So therefore I say item 3 on this list, I think should be strike or should be changed to say a different structure has to be initiated for this group to function as a group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Graywall.
Thank you, Board. Greg Graywall. In November 20th of 2019, the GSA meeting approved amendment number 1 to the MOA. The MOA has never changed. It's the original MOA that 4 agencies signed, not 5. And on February 21st of 2019, PBCC signed a conditional memorandum with 6 new conditions because they didn't meet their conditions from their original thing, that they could not be part of this GSA. They could not be part of the cooperative group because they couldn't be part of this MOA. So regardless of what LAFCO wants to do now or doesn't want to do, the history, the documents, everything shows they didn't meet the conditions. It's illegally formed, and the MOA has never changed. You're going to add a second amendment, it's still the same MOA. The first MOA said, hey, we want to stay a group under the first MOA, which is still the original MOA. Now you want to add a thing on, instead of Paso being in charge of the dough, Mr. Reilly will be in charge of the dough. By the way, it was Debbie Arnold that created this position and got this job and got the GSP finished. So we have some problems here with this. And if you're not part of the original MOA and you're adding an amendment, I don't know how a certain agency that wasn't part of that, regardless of what the county wants to do, because they wanted to give up part of their voting or wanted to do whatever because somebody got thousands of dollars for contributions to their campaign, then just keep doing it, because I like to keep documenting stuff. Because I've given all this information, which they have accepted, to the grand jury that goes along with what your answers were to what they asked about of how this basin was being managed. Because all the same agencies that started in 2005 with the prior agreement are still the same agencies that are here, that have been kicking the can down the road for 20-something years. So I don't know how you get a different result when you have the same agencies doing the same stuff. You have to change something to get a different result. You're going to do what you're going to do, and I don't have a problem with the amendment. I have a problem with how this stuff is being run and why certain people think they should be in charge when they don't get anything done. As an LA City fireman for 30 years, when we went out on an emergency and we had a problem, we didn't leave before we solved the problem. You guys haven't solved the problem in 25 years.
Thank you, Mr. Graywall. Any additional public comment on item 16? Okay, seeing none, any online? No, okay, bring that back to committee for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I think the amendment is completely appropriate. It gives more flexibility. And I completely endorse it. We'll support whoever's motion to make that recommendation to the individual GSAs. With that said, Mr. Tracy has raised a very relevant and pertinent point. This is a cooperative committee, and we do have a certain amount of cumbersomeness in a way we operate by having 5 separate GSAs. I would only advise you, sir, that the question of governance as we go forward into the future of managing is one that this basin is one that has been under some discussion. And I think it's going to take a little bit of time to get there. But for now, we're operating under the terms of this memorandum of agreement. We're trying to do it as efficiently as we can. You know, if there's ever any help that the county can provide, I'm sure any of the other members would be happy to do the same. We'll try to make it work as best we can until we get a different structure. When we talk about budget, I've got a couple of ideas about helping consolidate our activities, but I'll save that for them and be happy for other comments or to hear a motion for this recommendation.
Any further comments or discussion or motions?
Yes, I have a question. I agree that I think Mr. Tracy's comments are really thought-provoking. And I just want to confirm, when I read this document, I don't see anything that says that we're bound to this forever. Like, we can make changes later if we find something that is a better fit. Is that correct?
That is accurate. And this just really broadens who can act as a contracting agency amongst our 5 agencies. And yeah, I think it's entirely possible that this MOA will evolve over time and maybe be replaced, and that can happen at any time.
Thank you.
Yeah, can you explain to me a little bit more what's this flexibility for contracting with consultants? Is the PBCC would be contracting with the consultants, not individual agencies, or what? And then the individual agency would be paying them? I'm a little confused.
Yeah, so, and I may kick it over to staff in a sec if I don't handle this adequately, but I mean, for example, with the annual report, we need to produce an annual report and turn it into the Department of Water Resources. We've hired various engineering firms to do that. That engineering firm needs a contract with some agency. The PBCC here is not an agency. It's this cooperative committee. So, either the city of Paso Robles or in some cases the county have signed those contracts on behalf of all of us. And the MOA, says that technically only Paso should do that. And, why can't any of our agencies serve in that capacity when directed by this committee? I think that's appropriate, and that's what this amendment accomplishes.
Does all the GSAs have the staff and ability to do that? They have accounting and I
think that, if I might, Mr. Chairman, that's a real good question. I think it then those contracts, as we operate under this structure, fall to the agency which has the capabilities to manage the contracts. And the question of staff and capacity is absolutely one that would end up deciding which of the 5.
And this committee would make that decision.
We could make that recommendation. Yeah.
Again, I agree with Mr. Tracy when you're talking about a more concise way of making decisions. I think that it's hard to do that without total trust, that those representing the areas do represent those areas and the whole. As far as this addendum, or the changes with the amendment, I'm not sure I understand what the difference is if all have to agree. What is the purpose of one entity or the other being able to contract if it all comes back and has to be approved? What's the difference in one lead agency doing the main contracting and it still comes back for approval for everybody?
Yeah, I don't think it matters which agency does the contracting. I think in practice, the county has had, more staff and more capabilities to do that. And they're not technically authorized to serve in that role under the MOA. And that's what this is attempting to change. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it doesn't really matter.
Are you thinking of that bullet, that 4th bullet there that says it's got to be 100% vote?
100% vote. So
Right.
it's got to come back
to each of the, so
right.
What that says is that in order to allow this to happen within the MOA, all 5 of the individual GSAs have to vote to approve that change.
Right.
So if I may, in the past, the city of Paso Robles was the contracting agent on behalf.
Right.
We did some of the annual reports, we installed some monitoring wells, but our staff is very limited. And as we're moving forward and we're going to be taking on more and more contracts, we just don't have the bandwidth to do it all ourselves. So this provides us that flexibility in order to spread the burden out amongst the other GSAs. And we all proportionally pay our fair share of the work that each GSA is effectively
not only pay, but take on the work because of the staff. right?
It's quite
It's
a
not
bit of
about
work
the payment of it
in-
because we share that.
But
pro rata
it's
share.
managing the deliverables and doing the advertising and getting the contract signed, all the administration that goes along with hiring consultants and running the project.
All right, I think I understand. Thank you.
So would we be ready for, I move that we recommend to our individual GSAs the approval of this amendment number 2 to the MOA.
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, one quick question.
Yes.
So in assigning a GSA to handle the contract, that this group would vote on who they want? I'm trying to understand this. So we have a contract for whatever consultant. Paso doesn't want to do it. Someone else doesn't want to do it.
Yeah, we wait for the one who doesn't step back, volunteers, no.
But you know, they have to have the ability. They have to have the manpower. I mean, Paso's got a way bigger staff than San Miguel's got. You know, the county's got a bigger staff than Paso's got. So to me, it seems someone that has been doing it or has the expertise to do it, has the manpower to do it, kind of should do it. And then maybe we chip in, you know, to cover the costs.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't want to get stuck on somebody that maybe doesn't have the capacity to handle it.
Yeah, I don't think no agency is going to be forced to contract on behalf of PBCC, and no agency will contract on behalf of the PBCC without the full support of the PBCC. So
The way I imagine it happening is our PBCC staff will say, we need to contract for development of a outreach program, let's say. And they would come and recommend to us that the county take that contract or Paso take that contract, or, you know, they would recommend to us and we could ratify, and we can then recommend to our individual GSAs that sounds like a good idea based on who's
And
able.
currently Paso is basically handling everything.
The county has stepped up over the last few annual reports to assist, but yes, that's correct. Technically, it's supposed to be the city, but over the past few cycles, the county has pitched in because we just don't have the bandwidth to take it all on.
And if at some point you do a JPA of some sort, then you would have your own staff that would do that.
that's right.
Basically.
That's correct.
And I might say you got to show up for meetings or you end up being on committees or getting.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Item 17. Mr. Reilly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm going to open this up and then I'm going to ask us, Committee Member Gibson also to join in, but under the terms, again, the PBCC was formed in 2017. In the original MOA, there's requirements that we develop a fiscal year budget, and the member contribution percentages are in that MOA. But we really were, under the terms of the MOA, should develop and should have developed a budget every year since the MOA was adopted. We really haven't, and the primary reason for that was the only costs that have been shared among the GSAs have been the annual reports since the GSP was submitted. So there hasn't been a real need to have a budget, but as we move forward now, and the other not burdens, the other challenges that we're going to take on as the 5 GSAs, we really do need to have an annual budget that sets forth, you know, what our estimated expenses are going to be for the future fiscal year and how they're going to be proportionally shared. So this is a discussion item really to talk about development of a budget framework for the future and then providing some direction to staff on how to move forward with developing that framework for your consideration. And with that, I'd ask Member Gibson to also make some comments.
Thank you. And if I could, through the chair, I had a conversation with Mr. Reilly about this. This this group parallels a group I participate in Los Osos. It's the Los Osos Basin Management Committee. That's a basin that was in overdraft. It is not subject to CEQA because it is under adjudication, and it works under a interlocutory stipulated judgment, or ISJ. But basically what that does is bring together 3 water purveyors in the county as a committee of 4 to do very much the same thing that the PBCC does in terms of deciding what projects need to be done to increase the health of the basin. And we have been successfully doing that over a number of years now. When we need to do studies, one of the agencies currently contracts. If we need to have a well drilled, one of the water purveyors takes responsibility for that in a coordinated effort. What we have found there is that in organizing the work of that basin management committee, which again, I don't think you'd see as much different from PBCC, it was useful for us to have a chief staff member for the committee. We call him an executive director, and he's contracted to put together the agendas, to make sure the minutes get done, to coordinate among the staff, the individual staffs of all the individual members of the Basin Management Committee. And it's been my thought that as we get toward a more coordinated effort, like Mr. Tracy's observation, that having such an individual working for this committee as a whole would be a useful thing. And it would first free up staff and would potentially deconflict staff to the extent that there might be differences of interest or opinion on how we proceed on a certain matter. Each of the members can have their opinion, and our staff of each of the GSAs could have their opinion. The executive director would be in charge of bringing these issues before the committee as a whole so we can come to a cooperative decision. And similarly to that, and this is a fairly recent addition in Los Osos, is that the committee would contract for legal advice, for a counsel. It's not a large contract. I don't think it runs even $10,000. It's an up to something like $10,000 a year. It's only used when there is particular need to have an independent legal opinion for the committee as a whole. Each of the member agencies retain their counsel, and it is that establishment of that structure, which I think is a basic part of the overhead of administering the mission that we have here, that I think that the PBCC should be looking at. So I wanted, in my conversations with Mr. Reilly, I suggested that as they frame a budget for the PBCC, that they include that as a possibility. We can talk about it, see what information comes back on that, get a presentation from them. I'm not asking for a specific, I'm not proposing a specific recommendation this evening, but I do think it would be to the benefit of the PBCC to coordinate through a single individual who could then work these staff issues. And as we work toward perhaps a different organizational governance structure of a JPA or something, that would lead us in that direction. So I wanted to put that forward for your consideration. I hope you might agree that we should at least look into it, and we can decide later what we want to do.
Thank you. Before we have board discussion, let's go out for public comment on this item. Item 17. Any public comment on this item? Okay. Seeing none, we'll bring this back. I mean, I certainly, I think it's our obligation to have a budget. I think certainly as this committee is moving forward with implementation of the GSP, there are more and more tasks in front of us, and I think having some staff is certainly appropriate, and I think would be very helpful to the furtherance of our goals here. Very open to having further discussions about that.
Yeah, concern about just kind of mushrooming into some kind of bureaucracy at some point. I'm a very small government guy. As far as the budget, I agree we should have a budget, and I think maybe we could have a TAC type committee to look at budget. And it should be, goal-driven priorities set, and we definitely should have a budget, but I'm real hesitant on, hiring staff and then more staff, and it just never seems to end. And, I represent a small community. So I'm concerned about the cost, very much so. So I guess we can look at it, but again, I'm generally, kind of opposed to the idea of starting to hire layers of people and starting to build bureaucracy.
Thank you.
I'm a little confused. Do we not have a budget?
We do not have a budget.
When we talked earlier about having a budget displayed on the website and whatnot, that wasn't what we were discussing.
Each of the agencies has their own budget. This cooperative.
You're talking about the cooperative.
That's right. That's right. But as we engage on more joint projects, it's appropriate.
I kind of agree. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Mr. Baker.
Mr. Baker, I'm sorry. I agree. I don't want to create one more layer. But I think when we get to a position where we're in a JPA, I think that's when you probably need to start that structure. But at this point, I think we're just maybe adding more than necessary. We do all have the attorneys for each. I just think it's maybe a little bit premature at this point.
If I might.
Sure.
If I might respond, I'm certainly sensitive to that, and we don't hire somebody to just to have a figurehead, right? What I would ask, if this committee would at least have our staff look at how that would look like and how it would affect their ability. For instance, we heard from Mr. Elkel that Paso Robles staff is challenged to take on issues of Paso Robles Sigma, in addition to all the other things that Public Works does. And similarly, Mr. Reilly has 5 different basins, or 6 technically, that he's responsible for, and this is but a piece of his portfolio. Similarly, San Miguel CSD. I know Mr. Dodd's got a ton of things to do just to keep the wheels running. So the establishment of let's just call it an executive director of Paso Robles Sigma, or the executive director of the PBCC, would have to be analyzed in terms of its cost and its benefit. And I would ask, that staff speak to that as we look. And again, I think the important thing to remember is we are looking at ambitious programs going forward. The Miller program is going to be a significant thing. The blended water project will be a significant thing. The monitoring, each of these big things that we're doing will be a significant effort. And so I'm not, and it would be an agreement of all parties at this table that this made sense in terms of getting a good product, a good outcome. But I think that it's worthy of at least understanding roughly how much it costs. And again, on the matter of individual legal counsel, we don't, in Los Osos, we don't use that independent counsel hardly at all. I don't know that we have yet. But for instance, if the PBCC were challenged on a question of its conformance with the Brown Act, we might want to have a counsel that represents this body as opposed to the individual agencies. That's the sort of thing, and it would only be on an as-needed basis. So I'm not arguing at this point that we need it, but I think it might be a good thing to know a little bit more about.
And I think we're certainly not discussing or debating or approving anything like that today. I think we're discussing whether we want staff to prepare, develop a budget framework. And I think there could be a range of recommendations within that we can then kind of evaluate and discuss, but
Maybe we should ask staff if that's something that they feel is appropriate.
Yeah, and it's more than appropriate. I think it's absolutely necessary if we're going to advance.
If only a
advance this plan.
framework moving forward, if we do go down the road of the JPA, which I think is probably the more responsible
Yeah,
avenue.
We've been having
the
discussions
future.
about that internally as
Have
well.
you? I'm new.
Mr. Blakely, Mr. Reilly, what do you need from us on this item?
Really, I just want to point out two things, and then I'll tell you what we're asking, what the ask is. One, just per the MOA, the budget cycle, the budget year is a fiscal year, July 1 to June 30th. So we have time, to put the framework together for you to consider what that budget might look like for potential adoption in, ahead of July 1, which would be the start of the next fiscal year. Really, the ask would be just provide direction to staff to proceed with the development of a budget framework to bring back to this body for your consideration and discussion.
Yeah, I mean, sounds good. I think we've provided that direction. Do we need a vote on that? Okay. I think there's consensus that we need to develop that framework, and we should have a budget starting in July. Yeah, thank you. Okay, next item is item 18.
Thank you, Chair. And this one sort of rolls right off of that budget discussion. One of the major points of discussion as an outcome of the Miller program, Technical Advisory Committee, as they looked at what could that Miller program look like, what would be the elements of it, and ultimately, if there were costs involved with development and implementing that program and operating that program, how would that be paid for? And the question then really evolved to what would rates be most appropriate to be charged within the basin to pay for things like the Miller program, to pay for things like administration of the GSP, to pay for things like basin-wide monitoring, updating the GSP on a regular basis, funding projects, and then ultimately in the long term operating those projects. Those are all questions to be determined, but a starting point is we really need to bring a consultant on to help us understand what those rate structures could look like, should look like, would be most appropriate for this particular basin, and then ultimately come back with recommendations for the development and implementation of those rates. So this is the first step. There's we brought to you, we're bringing to you an RFP that will allow us, this particular RFP, the question was different contracting agencies. This particular RFP would allow the county to issue an RFP to bring on or to solicit the services of a consultant to perform the rate study. That RFP would be prepared in conjunction with input from all of the GSA staff, and then brought back to this body for consideration before it would be issued. In this RFP, the draft RFP that you have in your packet, there's a proposed schedule. You can see it here. It takes a little while to get these RFPs out on the street, solicit proposals, and then go through the process of review by this committee and GSA, individual GSAs, and ultimately to the Board of Supervisors for approval before a contract can actually be issued. So it takes a while. You can see up here, this is the proposed schedule that's included in the RFP. And with that, I'll stop, take any questions.
Okay, I think we'll go out for public comment and then come back to the committee with questions and discussion, public comment on this item 18. Mr. Cunha.
I do not like taxes, don't want paying for anything, but this is utterly essential. This is just a first step. I strongly support the action and want the public feedback from all the GSAs and their constituents to help inform it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graywall.
Thank you, board. Thank you, Chairperson, Greg Grable. Yeah, again, I'm gonna go over some of the things. 90% of the wells that went dry are in the unincorporated area that's covered by the county. The area that uses 90% of the water is two agencies that have 60 or something people in one agency and 160 or whatever people in another agency that are using 90% of the water. And if you're a de minimis user, you're not part of the problem. So again, when we're looking at who's going to pay for an RFP and who's going to be billed, to me, it's pretty simple on who's causing the problem. Who created the problem? I don't think putting the coyote in a different suit in front of the chicken coop solves the problem. So everybody can agree to disagree, but when the whole stack and pack vineyard area is over a certain part of the basin where all the dry wells are happening, it's not hard to see who's creating the problem. And if these independent agencies wanted to be part of the solution, then they're going to pay for a majority of the bill. And not little guys that have been told for the last 10 years that they can't use their property, while we're adding 5,000 new homes and 13 hotels down the street in Paso Robles, and we're letting 32,000 acre feet every 6 years go to the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tracy.
George Tracy, San Miguel. I kind of think this proposal that you're talking about here is putting the cart before the horse. You don't really have a plan for doing monitoring, for doing all the other stuff. And yet you're asking to propose rates, I assume for the people who are on the basin. But it seems to me that you're not gonna try and get people to pay for something that they have no idea what's gonna happen. So I would suggest you put this off for another 4 or 5 months until you have finished the monitoring study, the blended water project, and you got some of these other projects to the point where you know it's gonna cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Powell.
Murray Powell again. Totally agree with Mr. Tracy. Can you, Tyler, can you just bring up that discussion part of this agenda item that was on the screen a little bit ago? A little bit further down. Is that the discussion item? There was a heading for discussion on there, wasn't there?
I think these are the
It's an agenda item.
these are the only 2 slides on this item.
Oh, can you hold on for a second? Let me grab, I've got it on my. So in the packet, there's a, for this agenda item, there's a sort of a report, a discussion item. So I have the same comments that Mr. Tracy did. In this item, it talks about rate study will analyze funding for regulatory fees for distributing and admin costs, admin operations, groundwater extraction, measurement, and basin monitoring and reporting. So I'm on the monitoring committee. And we spent a fair amount of time in our committee meetings talking about monitoring and how it should be done and who should do it. And nothing was ever determined. So I agree that we got the cart in front of the horse here, because we don't even know at this point what is the process for actually doing the monitoring work and for accumulating the data and processing the data and so on. And none of this has even been really addressed at all. So how you can do a rate study on issues that have not even been defined yet is beyond me. So I agree with Mr. Tracy. This whole thing needs to be deferred till these other issues are determined, and they need to be determined as soon as possible. You know, the monitoring, in my opinion, can go forward very soon. So we need to get moving and get this thing organized and quit dragging our feet and move forward on this. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Any other public comment on item 18? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring this back to the committee for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if we might get staff to talk a bit about how this meshes in. One of the things that struck me is in the timeline here, it's if we authorize this, which I think we absolutely should today. This has been in process for a while. We authorize this today. It's not until the middle of January before the action actually starts. And so I wonder if staff could talk a little bit about how this rate study relates to further understanding the costs of monitoring, costs of the Miller program, costs of all the things, because I think this works fine in parallel with that. But I mean, one of both.
Sure, I'll take a first shot at it, and then Christopher probably wants to join in as well. But yeah, so here in a couple of minutes, we're going to talk about awarding a contract for the blended water supply project. That study has a 6-month timeline to it. That'll be about close to halfway complete by the time the rate study would begin. That blended water supply study will feed into what's needed to do the rate study. In a few minutes, you're going to consider making recommendations to proceed with the implementation of the expanded monitoring network that the expanded monitoring network TAC has brought to you as a recommendation. That work will begin effectively immediately. As that work progresses, information from that effort will feed into the rate study. The other things that we're talking about, we're going to have to look at doing a 5-year evaluation of the GSP that's due. We'll need to start on that effort probably right after the first year. That will feed into the rate study. All of these things that we've been working on, a lot of the people in this audience have been working on very hard over the past year, will feed into that rate study. So the timing to start the rate study, if we wait any longer, it will be too late. So we need to get the rate study, RFP out on the street, secure a consultant, get that person on board. And by that time, that information from the other efforts will be feeding into that rate study. And with that, Christopher may want to add something.
Yes, the person who's gone through the Prop 218 process several times for various utilities in the city. I just want to point out, when you're planning long-term infrastructure projects, you don't have to have, or even, midterm projects. You do so without necessarily having detailed engineers' opinions of cost. You'll have estimates. You'll have estimates because you need to start collecting for that money sooner rather than later. If you did it the alternative way, where you wait until you're completely done with design and the need is there right then and there, then it's 10, 15 years before you have the money to do the project, in which case your estimates are way out of date. This is a dynamic process. You project your immediate needs, your midterm needs, and your long-term needs. And as the farther you go out, the more shaky those numbers are. But this is a process that's updated every 5 years. is typically what's done with the Prop 218 rate. You look at how much revenue you generated versus what your needs are, and then you make adjustments as you go. If you see that you're bringing in too much revenue, you can lower the rates. If you see you're not bringing in enough, then you adjust the rates upwards. But the important thing is for these long-term projects, these expensive projects, it requires you to start collecting this capital over a long period of time. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you very much. I have some comments that
I do too.
I do too. Go ahead.
Well, I would say, first of all, I think it's important that we move forward with this RFP as quickly as possible. And I think that it's important to note that all we're doing today is recommending that the county issue the RFP. So ask for proposals, then proposals will come back in, they'll be evaluated, they'll be discussed at this committee. And then once a firm is selected, what's coming back to us is not a fee. It's a study. It's a recommendation of here's the range of fees. Here's how you could collect fees. Here's the range of fees. Here's how they could be distributed. I know that I and many others are going to be looking to make sure that those fees are, the lion's share, those fees are borne by the larger users, that this is not an onerous burden on rural residential people, that it's fairly distributed. And then I think that there's some kind of ancillary benefits too. I mean, I know from our conversations with DWR, they want to see in every Sigma basin a fee tied to extractions. That's a key criteria for them, that basins are making progress with their plans. And so, I think that having a fee structure in place will also free up access to more grant funds, which you obviously want to do. I'm very sympathetic to everything that Mr. Baker and Ms. Roden mentioned. We don't want to raise costs or layer on bureaucracy. We don't want to spend money unnecessarily. And we want to continue to pursue grant money, as the city and the county have done on our behalf quite successfully. So I would say those are my kind of preliminary thoughts, but I'd like to hear from everybody here.
Sure. So this fee you're talking about is an extraction fee for people taking water. Is that what the fee?
Yeah.
The fee rate.
I didn't quite hear you.
I'm sorry. The fee rate is based on what water people take out of the ground. Is that an extraction rate? Is that?
Well, again, the fee study will really be, the purpose of the fee study will really be to develop what that rate structure looks like. And it's probably going to be somewhat of a, I don't want to say a complex, but there'll be different pieces to the overall fee. Some will be based on groundwater extraction. Some will be based on the funding, the overall administration of the GSP. So it'll be broken down into different elements. And that's really what we need, a consultant with experience in creating and structuring these fee programs. We need to bring them on in to really give us that expertise on how to best do that is in compliance with the applicable laws in the state.
Okay, well, my big concern is people with residential wells. They're not making a profit on the water they use. It's for them to live. And I really find it kind of outrageous that this is going to lead into probably trying to meter people's residential wells. This is kicking the can. This is, to me, where we're going. Because I've been hearing about it for years, and kind of here it is. So I'm extraordinarily concerned about that.
Well, I would just point out that Sigma does not allow us to charge an extraction fee to a de minimis user. So to a rural residential user using 2 acre feet per year, we can't, even if, we don't want to. I think that opinion's already been expressed today, but even if we wanted to, the Sigma wouldn't allow us to do that. That group of landowners are effectively protected under law by Sigma.
Okay, and I guess the other question, with all the comments I've heard and about all the different water that's not being taken from Nacimiento or the state, and I'm kind of wondering if we really have a big problem. because I talked to, a lot of different people and they're saying the aquifers, one of the biggest aquifers in North America is what we have here. So I don't know if we're kind of creating a problem so we can put a tax on people or start charging extraction rates for their water. Government seems to do that a lot. So we're really hesitant. I like some of the comments we heard from the public. I'm at this point opposed to moving forward with a fee.
My comments with regards to item 18, I think there is no question that we need a rate study. I think that I agree with Mr. Powell. It's time for us to do things. We need to start moving, and we have to have money to do that. We have to pay for it. When the California State Legislature signed SGMA into law, I think it was a really awesome idea. That we're going to bring our basins to equity, but it had no funding, or not to equity. We're going to bring our basins back to not in overdraft, but it had no funding mechanism attached to it. And so what that means is that it's our responsibility to solve the problem and figure out how we're going to pay for it. And that's what we're proposing today with this rate study. One thing I would ask Mr. Reilly, I would really like to see in this when we do move forward, and I want to be clear that when the time comes, I'll either make a motion for this or I will support a motion. But I really want to make sure that, I think it was the last slide, if we can go back, I want to make sure that we have a way to differentiate between the cost of like the general administration and, just for lack of a more formal term, I'm going to call it the keep the lights on money. I think that we need to be very clear in what that's going to cost and how we're going to pay for it. And then the special projects that we're going to do to support the health of the basin, and how each of those things are going to be managed, where it's going to come from. And then I also think that for the sake of our basin, it's really important that we get that keep the lights on money quickly. Those would be my comments. Thank you.
I have two questions. One, who sets the criteria or the guidelines for the people doing the RFP?
When you say the people doing the RFP?
Well, the consultant that's going to create this, who sets the guidelines for any guideline? Are there any guidelines? Or are you just going by their experience in doing this before, that all things are treated the same?
Well, in the RFP that's included in your packet, there's a very fairly comprehensive scope of work, and that was developed first of all in collaboration with all of the GSAs. Each of the GSA staff had opportunities and did provide comments and revisions. We reached out to a number of different groundwater basins that have gone through this process throughout the state to get their input and experience and recommendations. So the RFP has a scope of work, and that is what we're asking the consultant to perform. And then through the process, once the consultant's brought on board, GSA member staff are going to be part of the working group that works with that consultant to, as the study evolves, to help direct. I mean, the consultant's going to have a lot of questions as they move through the process. It goes to Ms. Graves' question. There's the requirements to do a Prop 218 and a Prop 26 compliant rate study are pretty rigorous. I mean, we have to identify the costs that are going to be recovered through rates in a very detailed manner. And so that's what we're asking the consultant to do. I'm not sure if I answered your question or not.
I think you did. I think I probably didn't read that chapter. So I'll go back and look at the information. But one thing, I do have a question because I want to make sure I understand this. We just went through talking about how all of us have input on saying yes or no on anything. However, in the general instructions, number 5, county rights and options, the county may in its sole and absolute discretion accept or reject any and all proposals in whole or in part. That doesn't sound like it's a balance. By reading this, it doesn't look like it's a balanced approach. If one entity can negate certain aspects or all.
Well, under the terms of the MOA, so you're looking at the general conditions
Right.
of the county contract. I would suspect that if you looked at the general conditions of your city standard contract, it would have very similar language. But under the provisions of the MOA, each member of this cooperative committee, each GSA is going to have to unanimously agree to contract. The county would be the contracting entity, but the GSAs are all going to have to unanimously agree to direct the county to enter into an agreement.
So it's no different. It's no different for any of them. This is the same verbiage that applies to Paso Robles, to all of the others. It's just I happen to see the county one. Is that correct?
Yeah, because we're the county. We would be the contracting entity agent in this particular case. The county's general conditions are included in this. But if it would be the city, I'm sure you have very similar language.
Yes, we do. And that's put in there if when we go out for proposals and let's say the bidders are deemed to be not responsible or non-responsive, we can reject those bids. Or if we deem that those that propose on it were not particularly qualified to do the work, we would reject all the bids and go back out.
And I think if we might show your other slide, there's a line there about evaluating the proposals that come in, which is conducted by PBCC staff as a whole.
Does that come back to us as well to be able to review the proposals?
Yeah, just like I think in another future or an upcoming agenda item, the contract would be coming back, the proposed contract would be coming back to this body for review and concurrence with a recommendation for contract award before the contract would be signed.
So it would be only for that one that staff has decided should go to that. We don't have the opportunity to review the other individuals who may contract for this. The other proposals.
So the other consultant, if there were a group of
right.
consultants that made proposals, you could choose to, and it hasn't been the case in the past because it adds, timing. We have to make that work to get. For instance, you could interview the consultants if you wanted to, as a body. You could, if there were, say, 5 consultants that made proposals, if you so chose, you could interview each of those but it would have to be, in a Brown Act compliant setting, but you could interview them. Yeah, we did that for the GSP when we had multiple consultants that made proposals to prepare the GSP for the Paso Basin. The cooperative committee members interviewed, I forget how many consultants, but several consultants before, and made their recommendation for award based on those interviews. You could do that, or you could do an ad hoc as well. So you have options.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Reilly, it might, I think, be helpful to kind of walk through this schedule quickly, because I don't think this is crystal clear on, where this process comes back to this committee. And this schedule could be revised to be more clear if needed.
Yeah, I'll walk real quick through it, and then again, it could be revised if you so choose. So basically, tomorrow, if you so direct, we can issue the RFP. It goes through, because it's a county, it would be a county issued RFP. We publish that through a statewide service, so that it basically hits the street. We're not just publishing the RFP in the local newspaper. It's published in a web-based portal. All qualified consultants will have access to review that. On November 8th, we would have a pre-proposal conference that would be attended by any consultants that are interested in attending, and very likely members, GSA staff would be in attendance as well. We would give the consultants an opportunity to submit questions, and then we would and due on November 15th, we would respond to those questions. There would be a deadline for final submission, November 26th or 22nd, and then the evaluations of proposals completed. Currently, we're envisioning those evaluations would be done with GSA staff. That's the way we've done that in the past. But again, that's something that you could revise if you wanted. But GSA staff would review and evaluate and score those proposals. If there were interviews required, or if we felt like there would be interviews required, they could happen. They could happen in front of this body if you so choose. Otherwise, they would happen in front of GSA staff. From that, there would be a recommended consultant that would be selected. And then contract negotiations would happen. And then by December 27th, a notice of intent to award, that would happen at some point in that time frame. We would hold a special meeting to bring that recommendation in front of this body for concurrence. If you so concurred, we would bring it. Right now, it's scheduled to be brought in front of the Board of Supervisors on the January 9th meeting. Those dates can slip a little bit if you want to do it a little bit differently, but that's the way we've got it scheduled.
Thank you. I think that's helpful. And I think everybody wants to move kind of quickly and expeditiously on this, but this is obviously a very important topic and one that's going to be of interest to everyone and the public. And so I think we could certainly consider asking staff to bring multiple options back to the committee, or allowing committee members, as long as Brown Act compliant, to participate with staff in some of these evaluations or discussions. I certainly think, either of those are great routes to go. If that makes sense to you, Ms. Roden.
And Ms. Roden, we could certainly get your response to that. I wanted to maybe just give a little perspective on that. I think what you suggest in the latter is a small 2 members of this board, if they wanted to sit in on the interviews, would be fine. But I wanted to emphasize a couple of things. One of them is this kind of rate study is a very standard procedure that's done dozens of times, I would guess, a month throughout the state of California. When you have a body, whether it's a city, a county, a joint powers agreement, or the 5 of us working together, that needs to do a project or projects and or manage a asset or a resource like this basin, we need to have a source of revenue to do that. And so we know ongoing, as Graves indicates, to keep the lights on money. At the very least, we need to have that we need to create an annual report. We want to run a communications program, maybe. We want to do this, that, and the other. There's a basic overhead of doing our business. And we've got to figure out how to raise the money to do that. In the manner of Sigma, as was indicated by, I guess it was, I can't remember who indicated that the Department of Water Resources expects that that a certain amount of the cost of managing this basin will fall upon those who actually use the resource. That's a fundamental matter of fairness. And so figuring out how that revenue is to be raised fairly among the beneficiaries of the effort that we've got here is a very common thing that we have to do in compliance with Proposition 218, in compliance with Prop 26. These have a very prescribed set of steps we have to go through to assess how that money should be raised. There are a number of different companies that do this. And so with this proposal going out, I expect we're going to get a number of different proposals coming back. I mean, if you know, to our more recently seated members, I can tell you that those proposals are going to look rather the same. And the issue then is to where do we get the best value? Where do we get the best response? Where do we get the best quality product that we can then use to make future decisions? To me, it is absolutely crucial that we get this going because we are needing to get things done and we're behind the curve in doing them. I would give you confidence on a couple of matters. One of them is that this is not imposing a fee. This is simply figuring out some options as to how the necessary revenue to evaluate how much money does this basin need to be managed and how should it be displayed. And the second is, to Mr. Baker's point, a fundamental aspect of this analysis is the fairness of assessing those fees. So as Mr. Reilly indicates, de minimis user, an entity that uses less than 2 acre-feet of water a year will not pay for extracting groundwater. It just won't. We can't do that. That's a fundamental matter of fairness. So I would urge that, and I hope we can get unanimous support for issuing this RFP. And I think once you see what comes back, and again, if we want to appoint, if 2 members of this board want to be more deeply involved, that's great. My experience with these things is that our staff are extraordinarily competent. There's not going to be a huge result difference in who we choose. It's going to be about quality and product and efficiencies. And once this gets underway, I think we'll understand more its fundamental nature to enabling what we're here to do. And so I would urge unanimous support of this going forward. And at a point, I'd be happy to make a motion.
And I'll also note, so at a prior meeting, we directed staff to prepare this draft RFP. So we said, you know, bring us an RFP, let's see what it looks like. They've come back with this RFP. Now we're being asked to issue. Again, we're not spending any money. And what we'll get back is proposals from consultants of what they would like to do for us. And we can decide if we want to engage one of them or not and learn what they can show. So I don't see any downside to moving forward with this step. And I think with each subsequent step, as appropriate, there will be more discussion and more deliberation.
So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll move that we direct staff to issue this RFP.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion before we call for a vote? Mr. Blakely, will you call roll on this?
Sure. Yes. Committee member Roden. There you go.
Aye.
Thank you. Committee member Gibson.
Yes.
Thank you. Committee member Graves.
Yes.
Thank you. Committee member Baker.
No.
And Chair Turntine.
Yes.
And give me one moment here. Yes, so that did pass.
Okay.
So there is a 67% requirement for majority vote.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to item 19. Looks like a joint presentation by Blakesley, Page, and Cunha.
Yeah, good tag team effort here coming up. So first off, this is the approval, looking for a recommended approval of the expanded monitoring network. Just a little bit, set the table, a little background. The GSP that the basin adopted and submitted and received approval for anticipated and contemplated an expanded monitoring network and to address data gaps. To do that, there was this body applied for some grant funding and received an award of $7.6 million a few years ago. One of those components, which is component 4, addresses data gaps. So among a couple of different components, one of those items of component 4 is funding for an expanded monitoring network. Moving forward, so to achieve that and to tackle how to expand the monitoring network, a technical advisory committee was established in March of this year. And they've, again, as I reported earlier, they met 9 times and thought through the different criteria to expand the monitoring network. Which areas should we have wells in? Looking at dry wells, looking at areas of agriculture, looking at, there's a whole list of criteria, and it's in your packet in the technical memorandum. But the final network that the TAC recommended was 150 wells. Our previous representative monitoring network is 23. So the recommendation is from 23 to 151 wells. The network also includes proposed locations for installation of up to 8 alluvial wells. That's specifically called out in the grant agreement. So there's recommendations for those sites. And again, as I mentioned earlier, their commitment and efforts were really crucial in developing this recommendation. It's memorialized in a technical memorandum that was drafted by GSI, who did a great job of putting that together. So appreciate Nate Page's efforts in putting that together, which reflect the TAC's recommendation. And that is provided in your packet, which again is provided for review and consideration of approval. The grant does require that technical memo as a deliverable. So we do need that to submit to comply with that grant component. And again, as I mentioned, it describes the methodologies and criteria for developing the network. And from there, that memo describes next steps, and I'm going to turn it over to Willie to provide a summary of the next steps that are outlined in the memo.
Yeah, as we move forward, we've got in the packet some really interesting maps, a lot of well sites, and we're going to get a contractor likely to help go shake hands and get measurements done in each of these wells. So we know specifically where the wells are, and we need to double check if who we think the owner is the current owner. And as a group, we're going to come up with our final agreement with how these folks will share the data. We'll put the monitoring network equipment in their well if they so agree, and then any of these will be open data that we'll share with everybody, including the state. It'll be part of our shared network in the future, publicly available information to understand how our basin is operating now and into the future. We need to come up with monitoring protocols, how we're going to write down the data. There's probably going to be different types of equipment, different ways to write it down, different times. And then how do you display it? And that's a data management system. And those exist, they're being used in other basins. We could develop our own. We'll likely go out and get bids on folks that have existing ones and consider those, and then consider what we could do in-house. I'm going to jump the slide. You have half of it on the next one. Oh, no, you don't. It was all on the same one?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Mine was. Yeah, so that's going to be our future. Is there's 3 different wells at each site. And hopefully the first one, our A well, will be the one that will move forward. Go ahead and jump now on that next one. So this is the timeline, and the gold bar is how long we have to expend the funds from this grant. And the purple lines are where we need to execute. And so these first steps are really, really important. And to get the equipment in and to start measuring is really key. If we had done this 20 years ago, we would have had a much stronger understanding when we wrote our GSP and in how to implement, how to understand what actions we take would be beneficial. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to go ask for public comment, but I want to first just thank this TAC for their tremendous efforts. And this is a great example of progress and a great proposal and great memorandum. And I want to thank everyone who served on that TAC for their excellent efforts. Public comment on this item 19. Mr. Graywall.
Thank you, Greg Raywell. I'm on that TAC committee, and I'd like to thank the other members that were on that committee. We pretty much agreed 100% on everything, and we didn't have any issues. And the only thing is we should have got stuff in already. But that being said, I just like people to look back at the history. In 2005, on the prior agreement, this was supposed to be started, and it wasn't. In 2009, the DWR gave the city of Paso and the county of San Luis Obispo $208,000 to implement AB 3030. This was supposed to be started, and it wasn't. I hope that we have the money now, and the things we're going to do, we're actually going to do what we said we were going to do at those two other time periods, and not kick the can down the road. Like Mr. Kuna just said, we could have done this 20 years ago. Well, we had the money and the wherefore, but the people didn't do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
George Tracy, San Miguel. I am very impressed with the aggressive schedule I see here. I hope it can be done in that length of time, and I have agreed to use my own well as one of the monitoring spots. And the reason is that when I bought my house in 2004, I had plenty of water. By 2010, it was going in and out. And I didn't have any data on the well at that time, and I had to find it. And that was a 3-day search trying to figure out where the heck the records were. But the well was drilled 650 feet deep, but they put the pump in an elevation of 257. And at the time the well was installed, the water table was at 147. So in the 6 years from the time I owned it until the well ran dry and I had to drop the pump, we lost about over 100 feet of water in that well. On one side of me is a 9-acre cattle ranch. On the other side, there's a guy who raises sheep. On the other side is a guy who does nothing. And finally, on the other side, there are 2 other guys who don't do anything. And all I've done is raise 6 cows. So 140 feet of water went down in little over 7 years. That is why I'm involved with this particular group. I was involved also with the previous group, the Paso Robles Basin Monitoring Committee. If we don't do something, there's going to be a lot more people who are going to run out of water. I hope I have enough water to last until I don't really care anymore. But maybe I will, maybe I won't. But I hope this goes forward, and I hope this goes to the point where we actually get some data by January of 2025. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on item 19?
Murray Powell, I'm a member of the monitoring committee for the PBCC. So today, I think this proposal is to accept the committee report that indicates that our committee recommended it, and we didn't. There was a draft report that came out around October 12th, and taking a look at that, there were some problems, and I contacted Mr. Reilly, and asked him to convene a committee meeting. It's a public meeting, public notice, and he did. I appreciate that. And on October 17th, we had a meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning that was going to be limited to 1 hour. And in that meeting, there were, I think, 4, maybe 5 committee members. Jerry Renow over here wasn't in, but he had some very good comments that he turned in. And then there were Taylor and Nate Page, GSI consultant, on the phone. In any event, the problem with this is that our committee's last regular meeting was October 5th. And at that time, we came up with a list of 131 wells on this report. And if you showed the report, I don't know if you can, at the bottom of this agenda item is the report. And there's a Excel spreadsheet. And that Excel spreadsheet on October 5th had 131 wells on it. The draft report and the one that's today being presented has 151 wells. And I was wondering why. And during that meeting on the 17th, which was only an hour, rather than waste everybody's time detailing this out, I asked that the consultant, Nate Page, who unfortunately isn't here today, to give me a call, and he did in the afternoon, and he was very helpful and very upfront. And what he said was, backing up 1 minute, that in your presentation at the beginning, if you remember, it talked about having 8 alluvial wells as part of this new network. Well, there was 28 alluvial wells now on the report that you guys have today. And so that was the difference. And I was wondering how that happened. Well, I was told that after our meeting on the 5th, which is a publicly noticed meeting, that certain individuals of the committee and Mr. Reilly got a hold of the consultant and told him to add these other wells. And my point is, I don't even care if there's 130 or 150, but doing this stuff in the back room, out of sight, is unacceptable, for one. And secondly, what this report is, it's very confusing to the public if anybody studies it. There's also 5 maps on this report, and a couple of them deal with alluvial wells, and one of them shows about 15 or 20 wells.
Sure, that's time.
Pardon
me?
Thank you, Mr. Powell.
3 minutes, Murray. The 3 minutes is up.
You know what? This is according to the agenda.
Okay.
This.
I went ahead and muted, Chair, I muted his mic because I know we were holding to the 3 minutes. Murray,
Yes.
we're going to stick to the 3 minutes. That's the rule that we say.
Okay, so.
Any further?
Yeah, thank you, Murray.
I don't think that this report needs.
Thank you, Murray. Thank you, Murray.
Any further public comment on item 19? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring this back to the committee for discussion. Committee member Graves.
I think that we are getting a lot of really important information from this project that is crucial for us as we move forward into implementing our groundwater sustainability plan. I'm very grateful for the members who have volunteered their time to manage this. I think that this project needs a permanent home and a permanent funding mechanism. And my questions would be, I know that this was said early on, this is a question for you, Mr. Reilly. Are we using money from our existing grant, the $7.6 million grant to do this, or do we need money do it?
We're using money from the grant to do the initial work, to expand the monitoring network, to drill and complete the 8 alluvial wells, and to install some amount of instrumentation, real-time monitoring equipment in a subset of those wells. We have grant funds to do that. The grant funds beyond that, the long-term monitoring and operating of that monitoring network will not be grant funded. So that's something that needs to be considered in the rate study.
Yeah, and it's also related to what we've already discussed about the importance of us having a budget and all of that. So, and then is this something that the Paso Basin Cooperative Committee staff would oversee?
Yes. Yeah, there's, as you can see from, go back to that schedule just a second. As you can see from that schedule, there's a number of different tasks and work items. Yeah, GSA staff will be involved in either doing some of this directly or overseeing the procurement and then management of consultant teams to do that work.
Thank you.
Any other, Mr. Gibson?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think this is great. This is the fruits of hard work and critically important. If you recall, the comments from DWR suggested modifications of our GSP. This was a prominent issue, particularly in the alluvium. And of what I see in the recommendation, I am particularly excited to see and direct staff to proceed with the implementation of these recommendations. So this is
and that's the motion.
Stuff. I'll make that a motion if you so. We will accept that and direct staff to implement the recommendations.
All right, second.
Any further comments or discussion? A voice vote, all in favor?
Yes.
Aye. All opposed? Abstentions? Pass. Yeah. Moving on to item 20. Mr. Reilly.
So thank you, Chair. This item is, we're bringing to you a contract to retain the services of a consultant to perform the blended irrigation water supply project engineering and feasibility study. In July 26, 2023, we brought an RFP to this body for their consideration. And that's at that meeting, they directed staff to move forward with publishing that RFP, soliciting proposals from qualified consultants. We did that, and the county, in this case, the county was the contracting agent. Proposals were received by the August 28th, 2023 deadline. Those proposals, there were 2 proposals. Those proposals were submitted to a review committee made up of members of the Blended Water Supply Technical Advisory Committee and the county. Based on the review, their staff recommended a contract be awarded to Water Systems Consulting Inc. or WSC to perform the project. This is the step to bring that recommendation to this body. And if you concur, you would recommend that the county proceed with awarding that contract to WSC and then subsequently issuing a notice to proceed. We have a member or one of WFC's staff on the project team that is in the audience. Should there be any particular questions about the proposal? Yeah, with that, I'd stop and take any questions.
Thank you. So let's open this up for public comment first. Any public comment on this item 20? Mr. Graywall.
Thank you. Thank you for it very, very well. Like I said earlier, blended water was studied 23 years ago by Paso. I don't have a problem with people blending water and using the water. In 2019, the Wine Alliance said that the production value of wine grapes in our area was $268 million. I'm trying to wonder why the taxpayers need to pay for the people that get the benefit out of blended water to use taxpayers' dollar to pay for their blended water. They should be paying for their own blended water and their own irrigation problems and everything else, because none of us are profit sharing with them. They're the ones that created the problem. They're the ones that want to be on all these committees and come up with ways. And I don't believe that tax dollars or grant money should be to fund their businesses. They should be funding their own, especially when they're making millions of dollars. And just for the record, whatever you do in the basin doesn't affect me because I live in the watershed. So I'm going to send you a bill for all the water that comes out of the watershed to the basin since I'm recharging it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grewal. Any further public comment on item 20? Okay, well, I'll bring it back to the committee. So thank you, Mr. Reilly. Any questions for Mr. Reilly or for the representative from WSC? I think this is an excellent proposal. I'm excited to move forward. So I'll certainly support. I heard the word move.
Go ahead, take the chair's prerogative.
I'll move that we recommend the county award this contract to this consultant.
Second.
And any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Okay. So moving on to item 21, Mr. Blakesley.
Thank you, Chair. The PBCC has historically met on the fourth Wednesday of the month on a quarterly basis. And section 4.5 of the MOA specifies that the quarterly meeting cadence is your minimum requirement according to the MOA. However, given the increased level of activity, the PBC staff is recommending that the PBCC meet on a bi-monthly basis, i.e. every other month, and consider special meetings as needed. So a proposed bi-monthly schedule is included in your packet. A snapshot of that is shown on the screen. And so again, this would be a proposal to keep the fourth Wednesday of every other month starting in January. Again, this is a draft schedule for your consideration, and happy to answer any questions. I would note one thing on this proposed draft schedule. Again, if there's another idea, staff is open to that. The November, I would just point out, it doesn't follow the fourth Wednesday cadence because that is the Thanksgiving weekend. So that was.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, bring it back.
Mr. Chairman, I think that meeting bi-monthly sounds like a good idea. I would note that I know that I have a conflict on November 20th of 2024, as that's the meeting week of our State Association of Counties. And since it got shifted a little bit because of Thanksgiving, being close to Thanksgiving on the fourth Wednesday, I wonder if my friends on the committee here would consider shifting it instead 1 week later to the 4th of December of 2024, since it seems unlikely we would be meeting on the 25th of December. If that I would be most
I have no issue with that.
Actually, you know what, I just
Now you have another conflict?
yeah, this is
You're a very, very busy man.
it's this year's particular. I will be if all goes well, I'll be installed as the president of our State Association of Counties in about 3 weeks, and 2024 is going to be jammed. But yeah, so the fourth, I'm happy to leave it on the leave it on the 20th or go to the 4th. It looks like my alternate will be serving in that capacity either way. So I'm sorry for the confusion on that.
No problem.
So do we need a motion for that? To adopt the calendar? So I'll make a motion to adopt the 2024 meeting calendar as presented.
Okay, perfect. I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Item 22, the opportunity for each member GSA to provide an update or make a comment, if desired. I'll start with you, Mr. Baker, if you wish. Okay. Ms. Graves?
I don't have any updates.
I don't have an update from Shandon.
Nothing we haven't said from the county.
Ms. Roden?
We have the so-called purple pipe going up the hill. I still think it looks orange from my place. But anyway, I don't know if there's any other updates. I'll defer to you.
That project is progressing nicely and on schedule. And yeah, they're expected to wrap up by the end of December.
Great. That's it. Okay, and then item 23 is any other committee member comments? Seems a little redundant. But, seeing none, we'll move on. Mr. Blakesley, item 24.
Thank you, Chair. The meetings for 2024 have concluded according to our quarterly schedule. However, there are a number of items that this committee has taken action or provided direction on, which may result in a special meeting. And so we'll be working with the staff to determine if a special meeting is required later this year.
Great. Okay, thank you. Item 25, any future items that committee members want to ensure get agendized? Mr. Reilly, any correspondence
None to report.
received by this board? Okay. Okay, well, with that, thank you very much. I'll adjourn this meeting at 7 o'clock. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you.
You did. I hope you have fun.
Oh, yeah. You know, I have a question. I noticed with most all of us.